Zoom. And let me hit the participants list and just see how folks start to come in. Do you downhill ski in addition to cross country, or you just cross
Just,
country?
I mean, I love it, but I'm like total, pretty novice downhill skier. But I just love it though. I can't get enough of it. But yeah, mostly cross country these days. So
Did you do a another long cross country race this past?
yeah, February I was doing my Wisconsin marathon. So I
Oh my
love that thing.
gosh, that's so insane.
Yeah, I have this group of buddies, that kind of comes from all over the country here, and even a buddy from Norway that comes over and does it with us, and it's a blast.
Oh,
So, yeah,
nice. Well, let's
yeah.
see here. Now that we've gone live, we've already got 39 people in the room, and I'm sure there'll be some more joining us. Welcome, everybody. Oh, and we're recording. That's good too. Um, I'm here with Nordic superstar Ike Sturm,
Self-proclaimed. Yeah.
just talking about Ike. Ike is a big cross country skier, among other things, and he does a big cross country ski. Is it an actual race that you do, or is it just it's an actual
Theoretically,
race?
yeah, it is. Yeah, it's like a 50 or 55K race depending on the discipline, but yeah,
Oh
it's a
man.
long one. So
And in
that's probably
Wisconsin,
short in Colorado. Everybody's doing all this crazy stuff out there, so I have a lot
everybody
of
is doing
respect for
crazy
that.
stuff out here. We camped one summer, last summer in Leadville. I don't know if you know
Oh
where
wow,
Leadville
yeah,
is.
sure.
And people are like, "Oh, the big race is going to be going off in the morning." And it was the Leadville 100.
Of course, yeah.
And then somebody was telling me about what that is. It's like running 100 miles, and I was like, "You have got to be kidding me!" Like I don't even know. I can't even process that. Like I'd get 2 miles into that race and be like, okay, 98 more to go. I'd it's like,
That's some other stuff. Yeah, it's incredible.
yes, exactly. All right. So everyone. Oh, we're almost up to 50 now. So, yeah, welcome everybody. This is our third and final Thursday night sacred music seminar. Um, so we were first joined by Nancy Galbraith 2 weeks ago, composer out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Then last week we did our organ tour. I'm happy to announce that both those webinars, as is this webinar, were recorded, and this one is being recorded. And we're getting it figured out to get it uploaded onto YouTube before too long. So if you missed the previous 2 weeks and want to check them out, you should be able to do that on the Montview YouTube webpage. As you've noticed, I'm joined by Ike Sturm tonight. In addition to Ike being a world-renowned cross-country skier, he is also the music director for jazz at St. Peter's Church. Is that your official title there, Ike? Music
Actually,
director
yeah,
for jazz?
yeah.
You need to tell him you need to be the minister of jazz. You need to, should make that a goal of yours for 2021 to get that title change. But
I'm putting the request in tonight.
nice, nice. Um, but Ike is just a fantastic bassist, composer, collaborator, musician, and just awesome human being. He's been at St. Peter's Church for quite a while now, right? Ike, when did you start at St.
16
Peter's?
years, yeah.
16 years.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and has also performed both at St. Peter's and then touring and in New York City with a veritable who's who of jazz uh, and other styles of musicians. And so we're just very happy to have you with us tonight, Ike. Welcome to our Sacred Music Seminar live on Zoom.
My pleasure to be here. I wish I could see all of your faces, but it's wonderful to be here with everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah. So let's see here. For folks that are new to this, a little reminder that if you go to the bottom of your screen and hit the the bottom of your black screen and hit the chat button. That opens up a chat window on the side, and that's a way for you to talk and communicate with me and Ike, especially as we look for some questions along the way. Just make sure when you enter in your question, where it says at the bottom of that chat window, it says two, and then it's got the blue box that says all panelists. Go ahead and hit that blue box and change it to all panelists and attendees, and that way everybody can read what you have to say. So, Ike,
Yes.
we met kind of towards the end of my time in New York, so we don't exactly go way back, but we go back a little bit, and
Just
uh,
feels like it.
it
But
feels
yeah,
like
it's
it.
true. We met too. Unfortunately, we met later on in your New
Yeah,
York time. So
yeah. Um, but you were very gracious in hosting um, my church choir and another friend's church choir when we came to your church to do the Dave Brubeck To Hope Mass. And that was kind of our first experience together musically. And that was a wonderful experience. Um, I guess a good place to start is kind of at the beginning because you're a new face for a lot of us on the call. So I know you wanted to talk a little bit about your background and kind of what led you to St. Peter's, and I'm sure a little bit about St. Peter's too, since we've got a lot of folks from Denver here on the call that might not even know what the church is. So I'm just going
yeah,
to
of
let you take it
course.
away and talk for a while, man, and then
Yeah,
kind of
of
ask you
course.
some
Well, thank
questions
you.
along the way.
Well, I think about immediately think about my family and my parents who are both musicians, and my mom's a percussionist and teacher, and my dad was a amazing composer and arranger and teacher, and so we always had music around the house, and he always encouraged me. I tell some of my friends and students that he would always tell me to, do my quote unquote push-ups on the instrument, which are, scales and arpeggios and all that stuff. And then he said, and leave time every day to have some fun on your instrument, create, try something new. And it gives me goosebumps thinking back to it, because I see so much of what I do now has grown out of that. And so I was really fortunate to be around that, and just growing up and hearing, those, for those jazz fans that are out there, Art Blakey and Bobby McFerrin and Wayne Shorter, and just incredible Dizzy Gillespie and all these amazing people that would come through our house that we would get to go here in Wisconsin where I grew up. And so it was really pretty wild to experience all that. And so I grew up loving music and playing, and actually started kind of more on tuba, and my school didn't have a bass, so I started playing a cello standing up, tuned like a bass, and eventually got hold of an instrument. And I went to school where my dad was teaching. He was the jazz director at a place called the Eastman School of Music out in Rochester, New York. And so I went to school there for jazz and music ed, and met my wife Misty there, who's an incredible singer that you'll hear from in a minute. And and when we finished school, we moved to New York City, like all the musicians do. No one knows what to do, and so you just jump on a bus and go to New York. And that was a big change for us, going from Rochester, where we really had a community, and then you get to New York, and it was like crickets. There was just, I had, a gig literally every single night for the last month I was in Rochester. And then when we moved to New York, it was just absolute silence. And
Yeah.
we actually moved out to Long Island because my wife had a teaching job out there. And so I had this sort of uh, kind of discouraging moment on a Sunday morning. We hadn't found a church yet, and I had a Sunday morning gig at a place called the Bowery Poetry Club, which is about what you might guess it's like. They're a very funky, quirky place downtown. Some people may know about it or have been there. I don't think it's there anymore, but anyways, I got a gig there and played with these musicians that I didn't know, and it was a very, quite an quite an interesting gig. And I just really felt this kind of rock bottom, like, wow, where am I going with this? Where is this music that I've been
Right.
working so hard on? How is this going to find its way into the ether? And so I was on this gig and I took a break and I didn't know anyone. I felt pretty lonesome, and I opened up this magazine called All About Jazz that I had never read, and there was a big ad. And I should back up a second and say that in college I was writing. I grew up in the Lutheran Church actually in Wisconsin,
Hmm.
which is what you do in Wisconsin.
Right.
And then I was writing sacred music. So I was writing this jazz music, but that was infused and inspired by, programmatically by scripture and by these feelings that I was having in the music. And so, which is not what you do in school. That is not what you
Right.
do in jazz school. It was very strange to be writing sacred music for my recitals and all this stuff, but I felt really connected to it. It had an edge to it for me. And so fast forward a little bit to this. I'm reading the paper at this gig, and there's an ad that says uh, Lutheran Church seeking jazz musician and composer, like for a job in New York City. I was completely confused that
Right.
something like this actually existed, and this was in 2004. And so, I was looking at getting a job at Target or a very different avenue at that point. And so I went all in, and I actually ended up composing. The requirement for the job was to bring a band in and compose some liturgical settings, including Just As I Am, which ended up being part of my jazz mass years later, some of which we'll listen to in a little bit. And so I was. And one interesting piece of that is I remember our past finding out that there was a real history to St. Peter's. All of these incredible kind of household jazz names that we know: Miles Davis, Dizzy Gillespie, Thelonious
Right.
Monk,
Right.
Coltrane, Duke Ellington. They all had their memorial services at the church, and were actually very involved. Billy Strayhorn gave his piano to the church, and we still have there. And so there's this incredible history of like really being like the spiritual home for jazz musicians in New York City since the late '60s, around 1965. And so it's a really special place with an incredible history. And I remember the first week that I was at the church, it was Dewey Redman's funeral and memorial, and all of my heroes that I grew up, like current heroes, were just all there, and it was completely surreal. I mean, it's like being in your living room and having all of these people
Right.
there. And so, needless to say, I was really fortunate and got this job. I think a lot of people wanted to get this job because it's a really rare thing. It's really the only job like it in the world, I think, because there aren't jazz programs at churches that have grown to that kind of
Right.
place where it can be a full time type situation. So
Right.
I always joke I got to behave myself, because if I lose my gig here, I think I'm not sure where I would go, but it's a phenomenal place, and I've been there since 2004. So
Wow. Well, let me back up a second because, and I told you I would do this. That there's some things that you said. I'm like, oh, I got to ask him a question about that. I got to ask him a question about that. Let's go back to before you got to St. Peter's and just the experience of writing the sacred music in a jazz, and maybe it's jazz with a lowercase j, because I think it's we have different. Everybody has different definitions of jazz, right? A great example is Wynton Marsalis has a definition of jazz, right? That maybe isn't the same definition of jazz that other people have,
mhm.
like whether it swings or not. And so, but at any rate, you're, a jazz bassist. I mean, how was that received? Was it encouraged? Were people thinking, you're nuts? Or was it somewhere in between? You
Well,
know?
interestingly, I think that it's an interesting question. I think the deepest anxiety or edge around it was actually within me personally. I think
Hmm.
that I felt really afraid. I felt really urged and moved to write this music. It was a very spiritual time in my life, and I had actually played on a cruise ship when I was about 19, and we went all over the world. It was a Mediterranean cruise. It was a world cruise, but we were in the
Oh,
Mediterranean
fun.
and Northern Europe and just all over the place. We went to 22 countries in like 3 months.
Oh, yeah.
So, so on that trip, it was very so beautiful, but very isolating too. Misty and I were not engaged yet, and it was just I had left my family to go there, and so it was a really interesting time. But it was a really deeply spiritual time because it was so, it's before before phones and
Right.
email and all this stuff. It was like
Sure.
long enough ago that I really had very little connection to anything other than what was available within myself and what I could read and talk to others about there. So I really dug in, and I wrote this piece called Spirit, that way back then, and that was actually ended up being my first album. And but that piece for me was really deep because within the album, the music is instrumental. There's vocalises, just ahs and oohs and
Right.
melodies being sung, and no text. Although the CD the accompanying CD has some text along with it that talks about God's creation and how I went to Norway for the first time, and seeing like some places that are just so incredible, seeing the fjords and seeing Morocco and Greece and Italy and all these incredible places that I had never been, just totally blew me away and found its way in a deep way into the music. And but I felt this real push at school, and I think growing up, actually my dad didn't go to church with us when we grew up, and I think one interesting dynamic as I'm thinking about it right now is that I've always been very aware of, do people think it's okay if you express your faith, or are people going to be okay in the musical community if I talk about how I feel or I express my beliefs? And
Right.
there's a real edge and a boundary to me around that. So in school, when I sort of pushed past that and kind of forced that door open, it felt really uncomfortable to me.
Mm.
And but I think in a way it was really powerful, and it was a way of expressing what was on my heart, and admitting and owning and receiving and all of that information and those so and I
So,
think
oh,
yeah.
okay. Well, I was just going to ask, when you moved to New York or when you graduated, was it something that you then were thinking, okay, this is going to be part of my career moving forward, or were you still kind of, was it until you saw that ad that you realized, how were you kind of conceiving of it, leaving college and going to New York?
Yeah, I can't admit that I had a strong conception around where this was going to go. I certainly had no idea like any of the St. Peter's stuff would happen. I think what was interesting, the interesting thing to me about it now is that now I'm at St. Peter's and I've been there for so long, and now everyone, my friends know me as the guy at St. Peter's. I've been there for a long time, and so it's like Ike. Oh yeah, he does church music. He writes jazz at church. All of that, and so it's very much accepted that what I write a mass, or I write a vespers, or I write another poem that's based on some kind of spiritual um, content, they are totally expecting that. And I actually miss the edge that I had personally and spiritually when it was dangerous, when I was in
Oh, that's
school,
interesting.
and I'm in this area where it's a little bit vulnerable, and you have to kind of step out on that edge. And I think for
Right.
me, I've noticed in my life and my therapeutic process and just exploring a lot of different things that I need to always find some kind of edge where I am. And you'll see as we kind of move on and see some of these projects, I've found different ways to access that edge of pushing boundaries, and maybe musical, maybe uh, other layers. But I miss that at St. Peter's. I almost wish somebody says, "Oh, you absolutely can't write this," and then it's like, "Oh, okay, now I will." So there's something to that. Yeah.
Nice. You're essentially just like you're trying. It's like getting a 3-year-old to try to eat its dinner.
Cool. Yeah, my wife says that all the time.
Yeah,
No, I'm just
yeah.
kidding.
At
Yeah.
least that's what we did with Ethan. Whatever you do, do not take a bite of that.
Yeah.
Um, Ike, how do you feel about? I think it would be a great time to actually maybe jump ahead and play a little bit of music, and then maybe
Yeah,
jump
that'd be
back a
great.
little bit so folks can start to associate a little sound here with you. And
Yeah,
I
that'd
know
be great.
the first clip we've got here. Do you want to just say a brief thing about the first thing we're going to see, and then we can obviously go back and talk about it some more after we watch it too.
Yeah, this whole time that we've talked about, I was composing for a number of years and putting a lot of emotion into these pieces. And when my mentor, there was a jazz pastor named Dale Lind, who had been there for a long time for Coltrane's funeral and all sorts of other stuff. He's a dear friend of mine, and I was sort of his assistant when I came on at the church. And when he retired, they asked me to write a jazz mass, and so I did it in honor of him. And I was listening to a lot of different music and checked out a lot of masses, like from famous sacred music, like some people may know, Duke Ellington and Mary Lou Williams, and, everything. So maybe some of the
Yeah,
pieces that you guys have done.
right.
So, but then even Stravinsky and also and pop music and all sorts of other stuff that really had an influence. And so this mass ended up having choir and strings, and then my band at the time, which was the Ike Sturm Ensemble. So this is the
Right.
Gloria from the Jazz Mass.
Okay, and what I'm going to do here is we'll play it on the screen too, but I'm also going to send everybody the link, which is right there in the chat. And because I know sometimes the buffering can be a little weird coming off of this. So if you want to
Yeah,
watch it,
the quality's much better if you watch it on
yeah,
YouTube.
yeah. So if you want to watch it on your own while we play it here, whatever floats your boat. Let me hit this button here, and we'll start this. We'll start this up. Let's see here. Okay, and that. Very exciting. And that. And here we go. Dude, oh, that is so good.
Thank you. I always feel like the ending of
So,
that glory when everyone this it's always this huge communal feeling, the choir and strings and the band is playing their brains out. It feels like a spaceship is taking off. It's so powerful. It always gives me goosebumps feeling that collective energy, Some
yeah,
special thing.
I got goosebumps listening to it too, and I've already heard it. I got goosebumps again.
That's
We
cool,
got
man.
one question from Jim Kraft. Now, well, Jim, maybe I missed. I think there was only one solo singer, but maybe you were one.
Yeah, that's my wife, Misty Ann
Yep.
Sturm, singing the solo on that.
Yeah.
And she's sang in the recording. So this is also part of a of an album for people if people like like that piece. There's a whole mass, like an hour long piece that's with that same instrumentation and kind of a similar spirit, and just called Jazz Mass under my name on iTunes and
Well, in
Spotify and all that
fact,
stuff. But
uh, Heidi, who is in our choir, already. I don't know if you're paying her off or something like that, but she already wrote in. If you subscribe to Spotify, you can pull up Ike's Faux Jazz Mass to listen. So there you go.
oh,
She's
there we
already on
go.
top of it. She's writing in, and yes, a couple other people are writing in about how great. Yes, Heidi's like, it's not paying me. Um,
Just like we planned, Heidi. Excellent.
yeah,
Great.
yes, well done.
And I got to say hi to my friends, the Kennedys there too. I don't I see some messages
Yeah,
popping up. So
yeah.
yeah,
Why don't you explain that for our folks that know Steve and Debbie?
yeah. Well, I met them at a we do a camp called Tritone Jazz Camp that my dad actually started many years ago, over 20 years ago now, and we do it in New York and Wisconsin, and it's a camp for adults. It's designed after the baseball fantasy camps, and
Yes.
you get everybody together, and it's really cool. So I'm grateful to have met the Kennedys there, and we've got a long time friendship now. So I should have thought about a way to give Steve a really hard time tonight, but
Oh, there's
there's
still
still
time.
time.
There's
Yeah,
still
there's
time.
plenty of time. So I'm pacing myself.
Um, Mary Hansen, who's an alto in our choir, who herself is a jazz saxophonist, and she's
Oh,
actually
wonderful.
started taking lessons again with Anisha Rush, who is a fantastic saxophonist here in the Denver area. She was
Oh,
just
wonderful.
wondering. She's
Yeah,
wondering
about
about this
alto.
the sax
Actually,
solo.
on the record, it's almost all. There are two saxophonists. One, the saxophonist you heard in that video is named Lauren Stillman, and I think he's in Germany right now, but he's actually moving to Montana in a month or two,
Whoa,
so he'll be out closer to your
yeah.
neck of the woods. But Lauren is one of the greatest, the other person I should introduce there. The whole band, they're incredible musicians from New York. The pianist is from Cuba. His name's Fabian Almazan, and the trumpet player is from out west. Ingrid Jensen, who's incredible, and
Oh,
Adam and I were talking about her earlier. She was just one of my heroes. She's just a little bit older than me, but she was one of my heroes growing up. She's just an absolute monster, and is my friend
absolute
and
monster.
neighbor now. She lives close by, so we've been getting together and doing these COVID concerts on the front lawn and for their neighborhood and
Oh,
stuff, and she's amazing. And so Lauren was playing saxophone, but then on the mass on the recording, Lauren actually plays alto. So that the reason we used
oh,
soprano for this one was because I was doing with trumpet and saxophone. Normally, we try to streamline this a little bit, and we'll maybe use one horn soloist. If we do it in Europe or somewhere, we've
right.
done it a lot of different ways. But Lauren is great, and then on the record, there's a guy named Donnie McCaslin who plays tenor, who's one of my heroes also. And Donnie is known because he was David Bowie's
Right.
saxophonist, and the last Black Star record that he made was Donnie's band actually. So
Right.
Donnie just absolutely shreds, and so we're so fortunate to have him on it. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's great. It's great music that you've written for them to shred upon, as we can say. I think it would be before we move away from this particular piece, and actually there's a lot to discuss about it. But so people know that that performance was at St. Peter's. So we were seeing an actual jazz mass service. I'm sure folks probably noticed on the video some clergy sitting there, as clergy do. and some folks in the congregation. Um, so, well, now that's going to lead me into another topic. Uh, so let me not go down that route yet. But as far as your writing of that piece, I think there is the kind of learning curve. Yeah, that was Ike on the bass, Jenny. Isn't he awesome? Uh, yeah, so
Little out of tune on that one, but yeah, thank you.
um, uh, the learning curve for you know for folks that are not necessarily understanding of, or maybe didn't have an education in jazz, it's always like that. Oh, what's written out? What
Yeah,
isn't written out? I think most folks on our call would understand that tonight that the trumpet solo and the soprano sax solo, those were improvised. Um, all the string parts are composed. There's no improvisation going on there.
yep.
And of course, there are melodic elements right from that the horns are playing that are composed. I'm curious, with your writing in the rhythm section, there's a certain level of intricacy there, and counterpoint and things that are going on that make me believe that a lot of it's written out. How much of that is you're composing, and how much of it was just kind of chord changes or open to the artist's interpretation?
Yeah, it's a really cool question. I'm always moved by music um, that kind of conceals whether or not it's improvised or composed, or kind of blurs the boundaries between
Mm,
what's composed and improvised. So you hear a melody, and then all of a sudden someone's improvising, but it feels so integrated into the composition that you really can't tell where one ends and one begins. So I actually there is a fair amount. I Everything is written now. It's essentially a classical piece for the strings and the choir, because everything's written. That's how I define classical. I'm really influenced by modern music, by minimalist music, by all these. I think when I start going down the road of trying to categorize what this stuff is, it's sort of a silly process for me, because I'm looking at it the opposite way of like taking in as much music that I love as possible, and then finding a way to express this that ends up being some kind of mixture of all this other stuff. So I kind of leave that up to other people to talk about what it sounds like
right,
or what it is.
right.
But yeah, it's in terms of writing, the rhythm section always has something written. Um, but in a lot of cases, like with guitar, vibraphone, the original piece doesn't have vibraphone actually, but I love Chris and we play a lot together, so I've kind of thrown him into the mix. But yeah, the drummer, for example, we went to school together, and I love playing with him. He makes the most hilarious faces on this stuff. He gets so into it. He's a great Broadway drummer. Actually, he plays a ton of the biggest shows on Broadway, and he's a really talented guy. But his part is very minimal. I'll have some hits and things for him, guitar and piano and bass. There are a lot of piano parts that are written out, like you heard
Yeah,
the little kind of Steve Reich kind of
right.
little moments there in the piano and things.
It's almost like a
So
Steve Reich meets, since you were looking for people to help quantify and
yeah,
label your music. Steve Reich meets clave, you know, and I think it's almost it's interesting that you had a Cuban, or is it Cuban American or
oh
Cuban
yeah, Phoebe
pianist?
on piano. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that it had that almost that it reminded me a little bit of some of the kind of clave piano lines you would hear in Latin music, but obviously
yeah.
in a totally different um,
Yeah. Oh,
genre.
that's cool. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that comes out in there, but I love that's a real working band. So the soloists that are there, we've all played with each other a lot, and so we play it dramatically different every time. I mean, it's within that framework, but my bass
Mhm.
part changed. I was changing harmony even in the moment, and since I composed it, I really enjoy the process of kind of every time we play it, I like having it be a little different and breathing life into a new space with new people singing it, and the band is responding to that. I'm responding to them. Those soloists that are
Right.
so in the moment, they take anything that's happening and just flip it upside down, and they're like magicians. It's incredible, you
That's
know.
awesome. That's so
Yeah.
cool. So before we move on to another piece of music, because we still got, I think, four more clips to get
Yeah.
through, and I do this. But let's talk a little bit more about St. Peter's, if you don't mind, just to kind of explain to folks what the what the jazz ministry means there. And I guess you'll do this now. I'm thinking about some of the clips we've got coming up anyway, but like that this was a jazz mass service, and I guess if I remember correctly, it's a little unusual that you'll do a full jazz mass, but
Yeah.
you're doing a jazz vespers service there every single week. This
Yep.
isn't some kind of outlier program that comes up for air once every month and a half or something like that. It is a serious part of the worship experience at St. Peter's.
Yeah, we've done a Vespers ever or Jazz Mass, usually Vespers. I would say like, 80% of the time, something like that, it's going to be a Vespers. But I've done one every week for 16 years, that we've been there. And then plus lots of festivals and all sorts of programs concerts and things that we do in addition for the community, and a lot of community programs, social programs for homeless people that are in the area, AIDS Momentum program. There's like a senior program and all sorts of stuff. We have a community called Zion that's a Spanish-speaking community that is part of the congregation. So there's like a classical mass in the morning, Zion in Spanish in the afternoon, and then jazz at night every week. So there's a lot going on. It's kind of like it can be a little bit of a circus there sometimes, but there's always something crazy creative happening.
Yeah.
So it's I mean, so there's normally it's a Vespers format, which has, we'll get to that in a little bit. We're going to talk about a psalm, but we do. It's always changing. I write something almost every week for the church, and the musicians are different every week. A lot of the players you saw today would be regular guests throughout the year, but then plus 100 other people or something, over the course of the year. So it's always different every single week. So I'm so lucky to have all of them there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's an incredible program, that's for sure. How you have now taken this jazz mass piece and performed it well beyond New York City. Do you want to tell folks where you've been with this piece?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. We've done it a lot in Europe now. I mean, she's probably a dozen times in different places in Europe. We've gotten into a thing in Norway. We have this band that's sort of come together in Norway. They're just dear friends of mine, and they have this interesting place in Oslo that's like basically a jazz conservatory that's a sacred music program. I don't know of any other place in the world like this where it's
Really?
actually it's really it's a Christian college, but they actually have like a happening jazz program in Oslo. So a lot of the players that are in ECM and these really amazing jazz players that are in that area. So I met them, and they brought me over there to do this the year that this came out, actually, like over 10 years ago. And then since then they loved it, and they're like, we're gonna just do it every year. so
Really?
so we've done it, like, I mean, 6, 7, 8 times or something like that over there with different choirs and different string groups, and then we've done it in Denmark and Germany and Sweden and DC and in different places in New York, and it's really fun. I mean, it just never gets old for me because it's always different. I think my favorite thing about it is that you get this new group of people that would never come together for any other way or any other reason. You've got a choir that plays with these musicians that are interacting with them, and then a new string. Sometimes schools will come together with churches and universities, and social. It's just so cool. It's always different, and so it's really been. The interesting thing is writing it, as jazz musicians, we talk a lot about, well, you should have a duo or something really practical so you can travel and do this. And ironically, one of the most successful and most viable and sustainable and long-term projects is this gigantic project with the mass, because it's this somehow. We did it in Iceland last year. That was incredible, actually. It's the first time going to Iceland. And so it's really something. It's really, I mean, I feel like it's so surreal when I'm in it. Like we were talking about in the Gloria, that spaceship feeling, it feels very surreal. At the end, sometimes people will like want me to bow or accept some kind of praise at the end of it. And it feels so surreal because I don't even imagine myself being have any responsibility for what happens in it, because it
Mm.
feels like such a communal outlay that like it feels like it's just something that I kind of enter into, that's absolutely a gift that just has been, my dad helped me a lot with it. He when he was alive, we got to work on this piece together. I'd send him string parts and he'd go, put that up an octave, take that out. He just red pen on it and stuff, because he was such an incredible arranger. And I actually didn't write string music for a long time after this, because when he was sick and when he passed, because I just I've so missed being able to collaborate in that way, and I was afraid to try to do something without him. And I think just in the last year or two, I've started writing again for strings, which I love so much. And just kind of, it still doesn't feel the same, but I've been trying to
Yeah,
kind of put my toe in the water, so.
yeah. That's such a sweet story, though. And um, I was uh, before we move on, I just have to ask: have you come upon a choir in your travels that you go, "Oh man, this ain't happening,"
Oh, I thought you were going to go the other way. Uh, you know,
or if you lucked out? Because I tell you, the reason why I ask you this question is I found out something interesting. You might already know this, but as I was telling you, we did the 50th anniversary, right, of the when Duke Ellington came to Montview back in 1969. So we had a 50th anniversary performance of it last year,
wow.
which was super fun. And we actually have some people in our choir that sang in that choir 50 years ago that are still in the choir. So
Whoa.
yeah, in fact, I wonder if any of them are on the call right now. Oh, Kathy is on the call, so there's one at least that sang in that choir. And of course, they were in their 20s back then. And but they told me a story how Duke Ellington actually sent out an advance scout, that he would do this to check out the choir before the band would show
Smart.
up. Yeah, right.
Now we have it easy. It's YouTube, right? We can
That's
check these
true.
things out different ways.
That's true. That's true.
But
But yeah,
usually I have some kind of, for me, a bigger variable is like, I mostly will do this with my band that comes out. And what's happened is, like in Norway, for example, there's this amazing string group that now knows the piece. And so when we get together, it's like, is very really integrated. And usually it'll always be a new choir, but my friend that's there will recommend a group, or they'll be fired up about it. And so but the conducting can be tricky. I think the biggest variable actually is with conductors, because sometimes if someone that's only coming from a classical background, that may or may not be rooted rhythmically in some of this language, we've had some interesting experiences with that, where they, conducting in five, or, some of the pieces are a little more challenging, and rhythmically. And so that's been an interesting experience. And what's happened is I've landed on a few people. I mean, I'm so fortunate, like someone like yourself that has a toe in all these different universes, where you can really translate anything that comes in front of you, and you would totally know what to do with this. And I've found a few other conductors along the way here that just kind of understand how to navigate that. But honestly, we really could do it with we've had a lot of a range of like incredible choirs to like people, choirs that are just kind of barely making it with some of the harmonies and rhythms and
hmm
stuff. And I think every single time I've enjoyed it, because there's always this group feeling and group joy. And we've also always done it with some kind of with these wonderful soloists that always make it
yeah,
special,
yeah,
so
yeah.
I love it.
That's awesome, man. Well, why don't we pivot into the next piece we're going to hear? If you want to tell us a little bit about what we're going to hear next year.
Yeah, it's interesting, kind of the segue from what I was talking about with my dad, because about 5 years ago, he had battled cancer for 10 years, and they gave him 6 months to live with colon cancer, and he survived 10 and 10 years. And so he's such a strong character, and inspiring teacher and person, and larger than life character. And So he had a huge impact on me, and I really struggled when he was sick. And so I had this group at the time. After the jazz mass, we had this group that evolved that was sort of like a house band at the church called Evergreen, and we made a recording. Right about 6 months or so before my dad passed away, and I was so fortunate and thankful that we were able to make this recording, because I was able to play the whole album for him. I wrote the album in honor of my dad, and I was able to play it for him, um, at
Yeah.
home. And so this was kind of like this piece. We did a version of Psalm 23, and so this video sort of, it was the last track on the album. The album is called Shelter of Trees. And this album just sort of like, or this song, Psalm 23, just for me, really, I felt a real, this album was very different than the Jazz Mass, in that there was so much control. You talked about the classical influence, or like things being written out. This one was wildly open. Like, they're all what we call lead sheets. So it'll be a melody and chords. And I went into the studio not always knowing what was going to happen. This particular piece is a little more written out, actually. Psalm 23 is fairly written out, which you'll hear. But for example, it's all written out for most of the first few minutes. And then at the very end, it just says G for the solo section for the saxophonist. And you'll hear it's quite dissonant and wild. It's talking about the text is a darker part of the psalm, and it's kind of the valley of the shadow of death. And it's like, he really, it's amazing. I always laugh because it's like, they could play a napkin, you hold up a photograph or a napkin, and they would just play the most incredible thing. But I really felt this sense in the studio of being a little bit helpless because of how I was feeling emotionally. And I felt this need for the band to just carry me through that session, and really that whole period of my life. And I really felt that from them. So this is a very different kind of take on, so this is the video for Psalm 23.
Do you want to, yeah, okay, here we go. Let me put the link in here if people want to watch it on their own.
I should mention there are a couple other singers. You'll see my wife Misty singing on this also, and then there are two other wonderful singers that were part of our community at St. Peter's, and they became kind of our song leaders in our house little choir. And one of them is Melissa Stilianu, who you'll hear from later on. She's from Canada, and just my favorite jazz singer in New York. She's just incredible. And then a woman named Shanda Rule, who's really amazing. And Shanda lives in Vienna now, and I wish she was still here. But we have this choir was really a special group of women, these three singers. So hope you enjoy.
There's some beautiful harmonies too that they sing. Yeah. Okay, here we go.
My shepherd, I shall not be in want. The Lord makes me lie down in green pastures, leading me beside still waters, restores my soul. Restores my soul. Restores my soul. Restores my soul.
It's beautiful.
Thanks, Adam.
Yeah.
I love those musicians. There's a unfortunately the video runs out there, but there's the end of that piece is this the psalm is so beautiful. Everyone loves Psalm 23, but it's on there's a record that's called Shelter of Trees, and that people, if anybody wants to hear the end of that, it's on there. The singers sound so beautiful. So
Yeah. Um, and oh, look, and Heidi is chiming in, also on Spotify, and stunning. So I guess the contract is still on with Heidi.
yep,
She's
right
out
on,
there.
right
Yeah,
as planned, Heidi.
yeah. um, so there are some things about this that I want to ask you about that probably going to lead us into a little bit of the endless field discussion, but we got to talk about Jazz for All first, because I think that's next. So maybe we'll come back to this Evergreen project in a little bit. Did you want to kind of, before we leave St. Peter's land, talk a bit about this element of your ministry there at St. Peter's?
There's so much to talk about, but I think I do want to get a chance to hear a couple of these pieces. But I think, yeah, one thing that's really interesting, I mentioned this last solo section, that kind of wild, very rugged and kind of exploratory solo that we just heard at the end of that Psalm 23. And that was very free. We really had that's different every time. And there's really no chords, there's no rhythm. It's like everyone's really communicating with each other. And those people that are playing that are just on such a high level. I'm always trying to learn from them. And but one thing that we do that's really interesting, it's kind of a high wire act, but at St. Peter's, I write a lot of this music for the service, but then we also end up doing a psalm improvised. So many Sundays we'll just have a text, only the text, and our singers will in the moment create a melody and teach it to the congregation. So even if people are coming from a different language background,
Yeah.
or they can't read music, or they can't read text, they can hear what's happening in the space, and we're able to lead people in a very organic way. We have a lot of visitors. Someone asked earlier, I saw, how big is the congregation, and I think total in terms of official membership, it's like 600. But I mean, the most we ever have at a Vespers, maybe at that Mass, we can have maybe a couple hundred people. But usually it's much less than that. It's not as well attended as I would hope it would be. I think there's just so much going on in that area and the part of town that it's in, and we're still working on that. But trying to kind of spread the word. I think when a lot of people, when they first come, they're like, "What? We didn't know about this. This is amazing." So, but one thing that's really cool that's happened in the past few years, there's a group, it actually came out of this Tritone Jazz Camp that we were talking about with Steve. There's a group that I was at Tritone one year, and we were hanging out afterwards, having a beer after this our last concert, and we were having such a great time, and people were from all these backgrounds, really diverse group of people in every way, and we were just having this best time. And I remember looking around thinking, like, man, church should be more like this. Like, church should feel this like very communal, connected, accepting, like wonderful fellowship that we have right now. I want church to feel like that. And so I was just kind of joking around. I asked this woman, the flute player, was standing next to me, and I said, lives in the Bronx, her name's Noemi, and I said, "Hey Noemi, if I started this at St. Peter's, a group like this, would you come and hang at my church?" And she goes, "Tomorrow. Let me know when it is, you know?" And so I was like, okay. And so I did. I invited the people that I knew from Tritone, plus people within the church. And there were some people literally couldn't even make a sound on their instrument or with their voice. And then some people that were like playing gigs in New York that are very good players. We have and so we started this group called Jazz for All. And it's basically a church choir, but then we have a rhythm section. We have like 6 saxophones and all sorts of stuff. It's a wild group. We have about 20, sometimes 25 or 30 people. And people come in off the street. We have quite a few homeless people that are in the band. And I've gotten to be, this community is just mind-blowing, because now we're on Zoom every week, every Sunday night. actually, and I should be careful of like 50 people in there, but if anybody is really interested in this, feel free to get in touch with me through Adam, because it's an open group and we have people from other parts of the country joining us. And but it's really just a fellowship group with the church. And normally we're playing music, but now during this time I've noticed how much people just need to talk to each other, and people want to just hear what's going on and hear if everyone's okay, and people are praying for each other. We listen to music. It's very much like this, except it's just a little it just happens every week, and we just kind of tend to each other, and it's really cool. And for me, it's been a real gift to kind of connect a little bit more with our homeless part of our congregation, and really I'll see somebody on the train and look up and go, oh, that's Marcus. Hey, Marcus, how are you doing? Like, will you write a piece for us next week? Will you write a poem? And then they bring in a poem. And so it's really been a creative group to allow creative voices to emerge right now, because everybody's got it in them in some way, and I love seeing that come out. And so I thought it would be cool to show. We don't have a lot of video clips of that group, actually, because there are so many things that are happening kind of off grid and in these times that don't get recorded. But it's such a cool group. It feels like a kind of New Orleans feeling, like where people are just, it's really celebratory. It's funky. It's that we have these pristine things that happen at the church, and then the church gets flipped upside down, and people come in and go, I'm going to play my heart out, and it's going to sound, it might sound really funky, and it's the best spirit that you've ever witnessed. It's just so cool. And I think it really gives people permission to sing and be who they are, and make mistakes, and just, it's just so cool. Yeah. And but I thought it'd be cool to share a very short clip of an example for those of you who are singers or improvisers, or that are just interested in it. This is an example of just a 1-minute little clip of a psalm. And I just literally, on the music stands, I have this band, a newer band now, that's called Heart. And this band is saxophone and voice and vibraphone and bass, the quartet. And this band they're so special and so good. The saxophone player is from Haiti, actually. And it's just so interesting to see these guys come together. And I literally just put this psalm in front of them, only the words, and then we just start playing, and we see where it goes. And so this is something that grew out of that. I just loved the way this sounded. So
that's so incredible. All right, let me see here. Oh, you had the perfect setup, and my computer's not ready to go yet. Here we go. Let's see. Let's do this, and let's not do that, and let's do this over here.
He's playing like Tetris on his computer right now. Yeah.
I got to minimize the video poker I've been playing in the background.
Yeah. Exactly.
So this is a clip off of Instagram. So it's going to be won't be necessarily full screen, but it'll still get a chance to.
That's okay.
Check it out. That's so cool, man. So we have to make sure everybody's clear on this. All of that is completely improvised.
Just zero of that was planned. I mean, there's no key, there's no rhythm, literally the people on their music stands, the only person who had anything on their stand was Melissa, the singer, and it was just the words singing that text. And so she waits for us to cook up some kind of key and groove. A lot of times I'll start and just start
Right.
playing, or I'll look at somebody else and give them the eye and tell them to start. But we really all feed off each other. And what happened, we had strings there that day during Advent. We have this amazing string quartet who
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought
Lena knows.
it looked
We
like
had,
Sarah Caswell was playing some violin for you.
yeah,
And was
and
that Jody on cello? I was trying to remember.
yep,
That's
yep.
Jody.
Jody's my daughter's cello teacher, and we played a lot of this music with Lena before too, and so she knows all of these players. And but that day we had music written for them. But then when it got to the psalm, I looked at them and I said, "Look, we don't have music for you for this. This is for just for today. Feel free to jump in if you want to. We're going to improvise as a band." And of course, they're such good sports. They just started playing and played all this really cool rhythmic stuff, found the key and jumped in. But they're just so trained with their ears. Even when Godwin on saxophone, when Melissa sang that note way out of her range up high, Godwin just is like, "Oh, I could do that. Yeah, I know what note that
Yeah.
is." And they're just so gifted. It's just really, that's what I said. I wrote on the little page, I feel like I'm flying, or it feels like magic or something. And it's not always magic. It's not always great. There are times where, like any music, when you're taking risks and being vulnerable, you fall on your face and you start something and you go, "Wow, we're 2 minutes in and we are not, this is not happening yet." And it's like, you sometimes have to go through that. It's like any kind of listening or conversation. It's, you got to get to that point. And that minute was the point where it was like the roof just about came off. And it's just so special when you find those places, you know.
If it makes you feel any better, even sometimes when you're doing completely written out music, you can get 2 minutes into it and go, this ain't going.
Yeah, absolutely. Because people are, yeah, it's if the vibrations and rhythm and intonation just isn't right. Yeah, it's absolutely the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that is so cool. I know Lena was part of a group. She took a class at University of Michigan called the Creative Arts Orchestra, and their whole premise was that to just learn how to play in a completely improvised style, and it is. And I feel very comfortable just kind of sitting down and making stuff up, but that takes a lot of courage just to go for it with a. It's one thing just to sit down by yourself, you know, but to have that communication going amongst a whole group of people with
No, it's
nothing,
really fun.
nothing
Yeah.
on the page to hold you together. Yeah, that's so cool, man.
Yeah.
So uh, let's see, Adam, can you email the link to this evening's program on YouTube to those on the Zoom? Yeah, so I will, when we are wrapping up here, I'll put all these YouTube links again through the chat that you can feel free to copy and paste, and then we can send some stuff out to over our email D list for folks. When people were watching the Psalm 23 video, they probably noticed some, you know, it was mostly shots of you guys in the studio recording, but it was intercut with some look like just evergreen trees out in the forest somewhere, maybe like on a foggy morning or dusk or something along those lines. And just hearing the setting of Psalm 23, I wouldn't necessarily make that association. But obviously there's something to your band, the band's name at the time. And then I'm also thinking that nature must have some kind of spiritual significance for you, that was an intentional decision on your part, I'm assuming, to include some of that imagery in that video. And this kind of leads us into your next project, kind of walking away a bit from St. Peter's, but curious if you would talk a little bit about that relationship, the way you see nature. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that connection. Yeah, I've noticed that this conversation today actually has given me an opportunity to look back at these last, 15 years or so and think about these different musical adventures that have kind of emerged over that time. And there's a lot of stuff in between that kind of connects the dots. But when I look back at that Spirit record that I talked about from Norway, and then the Mass was kind of its own thing. But but always, I've just always been so moved. I grew up in Wisconsin, and this really beautiful, some expanses, some beautiful fields like you have in Colorado. You have everything there. I absolutely love Colorado so much. I drove through. I've been there quite a few times, but I drove through on our way out to Utah last summer because I have this band. The guitarist you heard in a couple of these things is my dear friend Jesse Lewis, and a few years ago we decided we were playing a ton in New York and different projects and stuff, but a lot of things that you just pick up that night and you're playing this gig and the next night you're doing a different thing. And we thought, what would it be like to really have a band that's really dedicated and that digs into material that you have memorized and that you really develop over the course of years. But the reason we started thinking about it is we like to run together. We like to hike and just go outside. So we would just go hang because we like being together. And we put this project together called Endless Field. And we did our first record 3 years ago. And just last week, actually it's less than a week old now, came out with a new record called Alive in the Wilderness. And this record was such an adventure because we actually went out to southern Utah around Escalante and Boulder and Grand Staircase National Monument. And we took a National Geographic photographer and videographer, two actually, and two recording engineers from LA, these incredible engineers. And we worked on this for years, and we went out to this area with a solar battery. We're very environmentally conscious with this label that we're on called Biophilia, and so we wanted the record to. We were giving all of the proceeds to the album to an organization called the NRDC, the Natural Resource Defense Council, and they're doing a lot of really, really cool work around environmental protection and conservation. And so we put this project together of songs that are just upright, me mostly playing my upright and Jesse playing acoustic guitar. So we took a solar battery, way out. We hiked way out with this whole team up onto cliffs and slot canyons and fields and mountains and everything in between. And so the album just came out a week ago. Once again, the band is Endless Field, and the album's called Alive in the Wilderness. So the cool thing was today, when Adam told me about this call, one of the videos that came out is called, Adam, which one would we have up first? Is it...
I believe it's the
Wolfhead, right?
It is not, but we can make that up.
Oh, okay. Let's do Heart, the one that's in order, the one that you've got up there. So this shows the actual band, and so this story behind this one was we hiked into the slot canyon up high, and it was one of the more difficult hikes that we had, and brought our instruments up there. It's like 100 degrees, and the engineers are down on this cliff. We literally were, it's hard to tell in the video, but it literally was quite almost a dangerous area. I was speaking about being on the edge, and I quite literally found it in this project. But this is a song that I wrote for this band called Heart that I showed you in that last clip. And Jesse and I recorded it for the first time for this album, and so I hope you'll enjoy. We had a drone with us to capture this incredible space. So this is from Alive in the Wilderness. This is Heart.
Okay, here we go. You do such a good job setting it up, and then I'm not quite ready to go, which is really on me. But let me copy the link in case people want to watch it on their own.
Oh, good idea.
Yeah, and then let's watch it here. sorry, I stopped it before uh, your title came up. My
Oh, that's
apologies.
okay. That's okay.
But I listening to it on the headphones. I was like, at the very end, I was like, wait, did a bug just buzz by my ear?
Yep. Yeah, there's one really cool thing about this. One of my favorite things about this recording is really hearing the different spaces. In fact, one of the questions was about the reverb, and the other clip that we can watch is this other video. I was excited to share with folks because it came out today. Actually, it was premiered on this bass website called No Treble, and they put a nice little article. I can actually put it in the chat here, but. But this particular tune came out today, and kind of the story with this was about the day that we recorded this particular was we planned to do a bass solo in a slot canyon deep. It's like 300 feet up above us, these canyon walls, and it just turned out that all these threads of my dad and his memory on this call and in my music. But on the 5th anniversary of his passing, actually, was the day that it happened that I was going to be playing this solo, and it was just a really quite emotional moment. Once again, this was totally improvised. And I was really scared because I had practiced a ton, but I didn't know what music was going to come out. And it was such a beautiful location. And I really didn't know. It was just scary to not know what was going to happen. And it kind of took my breath away when I played the first note in this canyon. It's just like, it's otherworldly, the sound in that area. And the last little side story about it, when I was preparing and practicing with this at St. Peter's, some of you know the Ferbers, Jody and Alan, and their son Theo. I know some of you are on tour with him.
Yeah,
And
on our Ellington, Netherlands trip last year, Alan was our trombonist, and Jody came along and sang, and Elliot, their youngest son, was on the boat for a while, well, full time with us. But then, yes, Theo, their older son, was also kind of traveling with the grandparents and would pop
yeah,
in on a gig or two.
yeah, Theo's my buddy, and he came in and he said I was practicing some solo bass, and he came in and he said, he looked at me and he goes, "That's funk." I started laughing, and I said, "Actually, I could use your help." I said, "I'm going to need to name this solo song that I'm about to make up." And I said, "Do you have it?" And before I could even finish my sentence, I said, "Do you have any ideas of what you should call this song?" And he just goes, "Wolfhead." And I thought, wow, I would not have, I didn't see that coming, and I laughed so hard. And I thought, the funniest part about it is that I thought, well, no matter what music this turns into, I know that the song is now going to be called Wolfhead. So, this song, I felt like once again, like with the mass, I felt like I was a bystander in this incredible temple in this space. I really was kind of taken on a journey myself here because I didn't know what music was going to come out, and it feels like this whole piece that kind of emerged out of that space. So
Yeah. Okay. I'm actually prepared this time, believe it or not. Ike, not a moment too soon with only, 4 minutes left in our presentation. Finally got my act together. Here is the link for everybody if you want to watch it on your own. And I will share my screen now. And we'll watch Wolfhead. So cool.
Hmm.
That the and I understand there's only so much, especially on YouTube, right? A compressed audio file, but some of the bass resonance. Oh my gosh, I was just like, and I realized I'm only getting about 60% of it that you were actually
That,
hearing in the canyon, or that
yeah.
you would hear on the actual CD, as it were.
Yeah, it's fun to listen to with headphones and hear it at the high resolution. It's the space sounds and
Oh,
amazing. But yeah, that was the first thing that happened in the canyon. That was the very first take. I just started playing. My friend was like, Jesse said, just go. He was like a coach. He was like, this
yeah,
is your chance. It's so beautiful. He's like, just go for it. And so the very first take that came out was that. And I felt like if I had tried to write that, I wouldn't have been able to write it. I
right.
wouldn't have written it in the same way. I would have started limiting myself and started constructing these like, I'd start messing with the flow. And if you're just you kind of surrender yourself to the moment, certain things come out that are really
Yeah,
different. So that was a special place. I'm so lucky to have been able to be there. That's also part of this Alive in the Wilderness record. Um, so that was
yeah.
Heidi's cue to
Yeah.
she already beat me. She's on it.
Oh man, Ike, I wonder if you wouldn't mind just hanging around for a few more minutes. I think I'm going to let our folks on the chat if they have any questions for you. I mean, I feel like we could keep talking for another hour for crying out loud. Um, but there you go. Yeah. Um, but yeah, I guess this is pretty much kind of wrapping up our time together. But uh, uh, that's Julie Davidson, who's a member of our choir in the altos, but she is also a righteous upright bass player in her
All
own right,
right.
and pianist and songwriter and composer too. Um, yeah, if anybody has any last minute questions, I know I kind of dominated the conversation as far
I
as the
bet you
question.
guys are all used to that, though, right? This
Exactly.
is no surprise. No,
Yeah.
thanks to everybody. I hope I'll be able to meet you in person sometime. And everyone, it's so nice to see all these nice comments come in, and it means
Yeah.
a lot. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. Thank you, Ike, for taking the time to share your music with us and for picking out some really great pieces that show a nice breadth of your work. And we know that there's much, much more, but I think that's a great
Hmm.
little sample, and got some folks already that are like, come to Montview.
Yeah, I've planted all this with them. I've been in touch with all of them. So yeah, hugs to Debbie and Steve too, and yeah, hope
Yeah.
it's we'll miss you at camp this summer, but hopefully another time. Yeah,
Yeah.
this I hope. Yeah,
Go
we
ahead.
talk about the healing power of music, and everybody's it's been such an up and down time and turbulent time and for a lot of good reasons and hard reasons in terms of health. But I think yeah, I just hope that we're always thinking about ways to kind of reach people through music and how it can be healing, and so I hope some of that hit folks tonight and I know everyone we all have a way of kind of passing that on. All you guys get together and make music together, and it just keeps going. It's so cool. So
Definitely.
maybe you guys
Thank,
can bring your choir to St. Peter's sometime. I just have to
God,
say things like that because Adam's going to have to organize it, but everybody else can get excited to come to me when everything
hey,
calms down.
if
We
we got
can.
if we got a choir on a tour of the Netherlands on a chartered river cruise boat, we can figure out a way to get our choir to New York City. That's a much
uh,
easier endeavor
I,
than floating
yeah,
around in the Netherlands.
yeah.
But I think you've inspired a lot of folks on our call tonight, Ike, both with your music and your spirit, and we really appreciate you spending the time with us tonight, man. It's great to see you.
Right. Great to see you, Adam.
All right.
Everybody, and I know you all know that you're lucky, but I just have to say how lucky you are to have Adam and Lena with you, and I want to thank you, Adam, for having me today. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with y'all. So
My pleasure, brother.
Yeah, you too, man.
All right, we're going to sign off from this call, but Ike, I'll be seeing you in a few minutes for our little after party. Everybody else, have a lovely evening, and thanks for joining with us. Oh, hold on one second. I promised I'd do this. Let me just copy over the links before we sign off.
Oh
I just
yeah.
have to load this up.
Actually,
I've got it right here, Ike,
oh,
from
you got it.
yep, from what you sent me
Awesome.
earlier. So
Beautiful.
this is what Ike sent over earlier, and we'll see how that comes through. There we go. Yep, good. And so yeah, if you that's all the stuff that you heard tonight. Those are links for that. And then just a reminder to our folks that all of these webinars are going to be up on our YouTube channel in the next few days, both tonight's webinar and the two previous ones. So you can check those out. And of course, if you just go to Ike's webpage, ikesturm.com, you can find out a lot more information about Ike and his music there. All right, good night, everyone. Thank you all for being here.
Awesome.
Thanks again, Ike.
Thank you.